Yeah, my turn. What's your cruise? Cruise weekly. A really good restaurant over there, but it's closed. Did I tell you that? Like. Yeah, you do. What starts it? Yeah. We couldn't hit it when we. That's very fun. That's totally cool. for a second. You know,
Okay.
share that we got some noise.
Man, I wonder. Usually
I don't have internet, but that doesn't affect anyone else. Just a constant state of
The mixer is on.
mixers on. We're unmuted. Okay, I think we're ready whenever you are, Chair.
Okay. Then we'll call to order the work session for the Cottonwood Heights City Planning Commission meeting for January 4th, 2023. Happy New Year, everyone. This meeting is to for staff to brief the council or the commission on the items that we're going to be covering in the business session that will start at 6. We do have a quorum and everyone here so far is in person, no one on Zoom yet. The 2 items that we have on the agenda in the business session this evening are project AHO 22007, which is a public hearing and possible action on a request from Jonathan Higbee for a declaration of an existing use violation as a non-conforming use. And then the second project on the agenda tonight is SUB 22005, a public hearing and possible action on a request from Ivory Homes for preliminary plat approval of a PUD consisting of 13 family lots and a public park on Dover Hill Drive. Are there any other items that we want to discuss besides the 2 business items? Not by staff. All right.
Are there, we get, I saw there was an updated version of sleds for January 3rd, is that right?
Yeah, if we have time, I can just summarize what it is. It's pretty minor.
Okay.
All right, well, let's jump into project 22007.
Right. This one is kind of interesting. I don't think the commission has considered one of these in the past, but we'll run through it here. This is a request to have an existing use or structure violation deemed non-conforming, which is legal non-conforming. The subject property here affected by this is at 7128 South, 2985 East. The applicant is Jonathan Higbee. This is just in the kind of neighborhood east of the rec center, in the R18 single family zone. Staff's recommendation is temporary approval, and we'll go through what that means and why. So as I said, the request is declaration of an existing use violation as a non-conforming use. That's essentially taking a structure or use that is illegal, that was not approved under any code process or anything like that. It's sat as is for a period of 5 years, and now the request is to have that deemed legal non-conforming, even though there was never approval given when it was originally placed. There are 2 sheds that exist on this property, which are the subject of the request. And actually the applicant submitted an application only to have one of them deemed non-conforming, but staff's recommendation pertains to both of them after our analysis was done. So the background for this is a notice of violation was issued by the Code Enforcement Division back in November. As a result of that, the applicant found a provision in the ordinance and made this application based on that notice of violation as a potential remedy to the violation. I do want to state, I know the narrative and even the public comments we got from the applicant have a lot of information about code enforcement and enforcement officers and things like that. I'm not involved in that side of things, but I do know our police chief Russo is if you have enforcement related questions, he's qualified to answer those, so feel free to call him up. Here's the ordinance provision that is the authority that the commission is acting with tonight. It's in the non-conforming structure chapter of the city code. Most everything in this chapter is generally the purview of the appeals hearing officer of the city. Variances and expansion of non-conforming buildings and things like that, they almost always go to the hearing officer. This one does not. This one says it goes to the planning commission. So here's what it says. It says whenever a land or a structure is used in violation of this title, the owner may file an application with the planning commission to have the use declared non-conforming. The commission may approve such an application only when evidence establishes all of the following. So the 3 main criteria are that the use exists on the property and has been in continuous violation for at least 5 years. No complaint has been made to the department or to the city regarding that violation for, again, at least 5 years. And then continuation of the use or structure will not have a detrimental effect on health, safety, or welfare of persons or property in the vicinity. It then goes on to state, this is summarized, it's not verbatim, the commission may set conditions it deems necessary for the protection of adjacent properties or the public welfare, including provisions limiting the period of time the use may continue. And then that commission decisions may be appealed to the appeals hearing officer. That's the authority given to the commission here. It is not a conditional use. So it's not subject to the state code provisions for conditional uses. It's just kind of a standalone power of the commission referenced specifically in this code. So here's staff's analysis. This was also in your packet, but I will just go through this quickly. The application was made for what I'm calling here the 2015 shed, which is the shed closer to the front of the home. And we've done a quick analysis here of what complies and what doesn't with that shed. It was built in 2015. It's 8.5 feet in height. That complies with accessory buildings standards. They can be up to 14 feet and then 20 in certain circumstances. So the height is not a violation. However, it's located in the side yard. It's 26 inches from side property line, so just over 2 feet. Normally, the minimum setback is at least 3. And then there are fewer than 6 feet of separation from nearby attached structures. The carport, even though it's open, is considered part of the home. It's part of the footprint of the house. The ordinance requires for accessory buildings that they be located in the rear yard of a home, separated by at least 6 feet from the primary structure. And then, like I said, at least 3 feet from property lines.
6 feet behind.
Yeah. In
That's
the rear,
the definition of side yard is.
so rear of the home, generally we would draw a line kind of along the back here of the property, and it's got to be 6 feet back from that point, anywhere in the yard. The 6 feet, I believe, comes from a structure separation fire code kind of standard. But so the rear yard is usually, sometimes we measure it from the back of the furthest most point of the primary structure, which might be back here. Even something like that, we have used in the past to define what the rear yard is. It's behind the home. This one clearly is not. This is the one the notice of violation was issued against, again in November. Then there's a 2003 shed on the property. Again, just over 9 feet in height, which is compliant. It is still technically, again, by the city's definition of side yard, located in the side yard of the home, which does not comply with ordinance. 25 feet from side property lines, which is less than the 36 minimum. And then again, fewer than 6 feet of separation from the main structure there. This, in the applicant's narrative, they state this is already considered a legal non-conforming structure under state code definition. And what that definition says is it's a structure that was legally established, and even though it may not comply with today's ordinances, it was a legally established use or structure at the time it was built. That could be, no evidence has been provided to the city to demonstrate that. So here's just our analysis of those 3 criteria. These have existed at the time the application is made and been in continuous violation for a period exceeding 5 years. The code in, even a minimum of 5 years ago in 2017 was the same it is today for accessory buildings. So it complies with this. No complaint has been made for a period exceeding 5 consecutive years. That was true until November. So loosely, depending on how you want to interpret this, the application could meet this code provision as well.
The complaint in November is the code enforcement action? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the notice of violation. And then continuation of the use will not have a detrimental effect on the health, safety, or welfare of persons or property in the vicinity. Standards for setbacks for property lines and for main structures are at least partially derived from building code, fire separation standards, and safety regulations that have been well established, not only here, but throughout the state of Utah. There's no evidence that these structures are properly fire rated. And even besides that, the city has always, there's good track record that we've always required accessory buildings to adhere to all the codified standards. And we've enforced on structures that do not meet these when when they're reported. And I want it, this is a clear distinction because I'm under no illusion that there aren't illegal structures all over the city. Code enforcement takes place generally on a reported or complaint basis. And once we are aware of a situation, the city will go out and inspect that and determine if there's a violation and proceed with the notice of violation from there.
So is that the case here?
What's that?
That there was a complaint?
I don't know how this came to be, other than there was a notice of violation issued. I know the applicant in his narrative was dealing with some animal related complaints. And the narrative states that during an animal, a dog barking related visit, the code enforcement officer noticed the shed and said and provided the notice of violation there. So based on the narrative, it does not sound like it was generated by an outside complaint. It was noticed by a code enforcement officer that was dealing with another issue related to the property. But there's something here that I think is important is the city has these standards and it's generally very good practice to follow them in all cases. And at least in staff's finding, exceptions should be very difficult and not an easy thing to just come get, just because a violation hasn't been reported in 5 years. So with that, staff's recommendation is temporary approval of these structures and not as non-conforming structures, but only for a period not to exceed 6 months. At the end of the temporary approval period, both structures should become compliant with the current accessory structure regulations. Here's our findings for this conclusion. 19.88, it not only it doesn't say the commission shall approve these requests, it's a may. It also permits the commission to add conditions and time limits to these requests. The property has a large backyard, adequate yard space to accommodate a relocated structure that would be compliant. 6 months is a reasonable amount of time to make arrangements to move these structures or relocate them or otherwise bring them up to compliance. And then again, based on the evidence submitted, there was no clear demonstration that either structure complies with the ordinance that was in place the time they were constructed. So our recommendation is that this applies to both of the accessory buildings on the property, not just the 2015 one. And again, no evidence was presented to demonstrate proper fire rating or design or anything like that of the structures. Based on all those findings, if allowed to remain, the structures do represent a potential risk, maybe not certain, but potential risk to health, safety, or welfare of persons or property in the vicinity, which is the reason that staff is not recommending that these be allowed to remain in perpetuity. And I've got model motions there. I think we got 2 public comments. They were both sent to you. One was by the applicant. And again, if you've got enforcement operations or related questions like that, the chief is here. So that's what I have on that one. Any questions here?
I think that the question is that, I mean, I don't disagree that it should be enforced 100% and understand why it is, but I think that I think there's 2 sides to it, right? If we don't, we let this one, then we let them all, and I don't know. I feel like the code is there for a reason. And but then I see the flip side of you go across Cottonwood Heights and anywhere you turn, you're going to see this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So as I understand it, that this would only come to light if would this kind of violation is coming to us because the applicant asked for it to come to using that section you referenced.
They made an application.
Okay.
Based on the notice of violation they received from the city.
And typically, what would be the process of the violation if it didn't come here?
They would be generally, they're given a time to remedy the issue, whether it's removing the buildings or relocating them. We don't care. There are a number of different pathways. Enforcement of this has been just placed on hold pending the outcome of this process, and then it'll be turned back over to code enforcement from there.
I'm excited that we're enforcing. I'm excited that we're enforcing code. I mean, as a young city, still relatively speaking, I realize this is a challenge that we're facing in a few different areas, and the hard part to me is when do we start drawing the line? I'm almost more concerned that if we're being asked to find one way or the other, if we don't enforce the code, then we've also created a door that just basically says, hey, you can put whatever sheds you want. I understand we have a code enforcement gap that we're trying to fill as a city. We wish we had more manpower there, and I kind of just reading between the lines in terms of how this happened with the code enforcement officer. I'm not pleased by how it appears that this has come about, but it's,
Sure.
you know.
City staff kind of daily work, we err on the side of the code at all times, and that's essentially what our recommendations do.
If the health and safety of the proximity is the primary concern.
Mhm.
Would there be other ways of mitigating that other than moving of the shed? Like, could they put up a rated wall on the side of that shed that would technically apply or comply with code?
It's possible, yeah. There could be other remedies. It doesn't resolve the setback violations and the location and, just the way this all kind of came to be, but certainly I assume there could be ways to structurally mitigate that particular risk. Another thing to consider is a carport like this, where it's attached to the building, it has a footprint. The city does allow those to be enclosed. If that ever were to occur, there would be no side yard on this, on this property anymore. With the accessory building there'd be no way on this side to get from the front to the back. If that footprint of that carport were to ever be enclosed. I don't know if that's a concern or not, but again, that creates another kind of setback violation type issue potentially in the future.
There's some other, we are talking about precedents and where do we want to go going forward? But I think one item that relates to, other properties is, there's whole neighborhoods where the lots don't comply with current city ordinances, where there is no side yard, there's not a lot of backyard. And so, in looking at this issue, there are implications to these other properties. So, thinking of all of the non-conforming structures I now know exist, right? As I walk around the neighborhood, they're everywhere. And so is there, I like the chair's line of questioning, like, is there an alternative to improve safety? The hypothetical of an enclosed carport, that's another issue. I don't know if that's a permitted type of, you have
That's
to get
allowed.
a permit for that though, correct?
You can.
It is allowed, but you have to get a permit.
Correct. Yeah.
So that, at that point, that would be a time where that could be reevaluated. So I don't know. I think that discussion about, do we have a hazard? Do we have a safety issue is an important question, given the existing building stock and properties within our city limits.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. There are areas and neighborhoods in the city that are non-conforming. They're all permitted. They were built legally.
Yeah.
These are not non-conforming. These are illegal, at least based on the evidence or lack thereof presented to us. We have the rest of this chapter that I'm referencing that falls under the authority of the appeals hearing officer has a lot of provisions for modifying, expanding, relocating, rebuilding non-conforming structures.
Okay.
Because we do want to see the reinvestment in old buildings in the city. And we don't want a house that was approved under different setbacks to never be able to add or expand or do anything. So we have a process for that, and we see a handful of those come through every year. We have a variance section of the ordinance where if there's a hardship on the property and there's, if someone wants to do something reasonable that everyone else can do, but there's some unique aspect of the lot, they can apply for a variance. So there are other pathways to assist with some of these issues you're referencing that are just, the nature of growth of a community over time and switching jurisdictions kind of in the middle of that. This to me is a little bit different than that, but I do understand. So certainly there are ways you could mitigate this, and that's the commission's decision. But yeah, our recommendation is to err on the side of the code.
Can we look at the picture on page 21 for a second?
Yeah, what is that picture?
It's a. Where's the carport?
Yeah, I don't have that in the presentation, but I can pull it up. We'll get it.
What I'm noticing is just the building that's immediately adjacent to the carport. By adjacent, it's underneath the roof. And I'm noticing just the junction. And I'm not going to comment, I'm not an engineer, but I'm looking at that, and this is that interface, when we talk about safe, that, you know, I see concerns all over the place there.
Is this the one Commissioner Mills?
That's the one, if you can zoom it to the junction, especially at the top. There, just, yeah, right about there. I'm just observing just the edge of the shed, the structural integrity of. Again, we're not examining the carport here, the base of the carport, the three structural members that are holding the carport up, and the way that it's tucked underneath the carport. It appears that the fascia has been modified or was never in place. That interference of that junction does not appear to be safe to me. So when we talk about safety, I think there are safety issues there. So we go back to the issue.
Yeah, it seems like they tied into it irresponsibly in a way that now makes it a part of the home structure, but not actually engineered to be a part of the home structure. That's kind of what I'm seeing.
That's all.
The way they've done it, it actually is part of the home structure
Yeah,
from a code standpoint.
exactly. Do you have the Higbees lived here, and were they the ones that constructed this, or is this a liability that they have now?
They constructed the
Acquired.
accessory building.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know about the house itself, but the
So
shed,
the
they,
two sheds they constructed.
I believe so from the narrative, at least the 2015 one. There was evidence provided of old email exchanges between them and the shed installer.
Okay. And the reason I bring that up is just as all of us have seen and stated, there's a lot of these types of structures across the city, and what kind of can of worms that would be opening up for the city in general, and the amount of funds that are required for them to take these, you know, to be conforming use. And I think that our standpoint is we want every building to be conforming and to be legal structures in the city. But, you know, the precedent that we set is that this can happen every week, every day. And, you know, all the neighborhoods that we walk, we're going to be seeing this. So how can we, if somebody is now taking this liability on, if they just moved into the city within the last year and somebody complains about something unrelated, and then this now pops up as a liability for the homeowners, what is that going to be putting from a city standpoint? I don't know if there's a way for the city to, you know, set something up to kind of like a retrofit program within the city to allow for homeowners to either apply for this so that there's some type of a standard to move this forward, because the precedent that we set tonight, once again, we saw multiple non-conforming spaces that are now, you know, at risk of, you know, if the neighbor doesn't like them and they now bring something up to code enforcement, what is that now going to be setting up for neighbors and creating a sense of community for everybody here? So I think that my thought process in this is, you know, some of these conditions are for us to actually kind of, you know, sharpen our pencils and figure out a way that we can retrofit a lot of these non-conforming homes as well, or figure out a way that we can bring them structurally sound at the end of the day. Because I think that our goal is to make sure that the life safety of all the citizens, especially in the last part of the compliance there is key. But I just have concerns of what that's going to release into the city as far as, you know, a scarcity approach of, you people that are buying into the city and, you know, some of the integrity of some of these non-conforming structures. Is there any CRA or anything that the city has or any type of fund allocation that could be like a retrofit to enhancing or an RDA enhancing non-conforming structures?
No, not, I mean, not in these residential areas.
Okay.
We've got the Canyon Center RDA for that area, but no, there's no like neighborhood improvement fund or anything like that the city has.
And what, I hear what you're saying, but what would we, I mean, what could be done to retrofit these? I mean, just this point of this, what could we do in this situation? What could be done?
I don't know if there's a fire rating that we could have. I talked to the architects and the engineers. But I don't know what kind of retrofit. I think that would be an additional study, and I think the engineer report would probably state what would be needed on this or result in a tear down
Or a move.
or a move.
Move is the obvious answer to remedy this situation. You move these buildings and they're fine. They conform in a different location.
I mean, the reason we have the setbacks and all that is to ensure that if there were to be a fire to occur, a gas can that's being stored in this or something to happen, and it's so close to the neighbor, then there's nothing there to create the buffer. That's the concern.
Yeah, and on the next agenda item, we're gonna be scrutinizing
Setbacks,
setbacks
so yeah.
pretty heavily and taking them very serious. And so I think it's something we need to be aware of, that we can't dismiss them in one sense, but then enforce them in another.
I agree, and I think some of it's an education, you know, because we do have we've inherited as a city some behavior that maybe was less than ideal. You know, maybe part of mitigating is educating too, you know, whether it's through the journal or whatever, that to just point out that if you have one of these structures, you should be considering the safety and here are the potential risks, and start with education. We've done that on other issues before too.
And be aware and share what the guidelines are, what are the
Yeah.
rules associated with these structures.
And not to say that, you know, we're gonna bang on your door tomorrow, but you are out of compliance if you have one of these structures, and or if you have questions whether you're out of compliance, the ability for them to know that they can reach out to the city and find out, okay, but am I out of compliance? And, you know,
It's a dangerous question
it
to
is,
ask.
it really is.
Yeah.
Maybe, you know, and whether people ask anonymously and maybe they never call, but I do think that you know, communication is important. I mean, I've along with my fellow commissioners, I don't know if there's a way to mitigate this one, but I mean, if we want to see things trending positively, rather than just, you know, having to deal with putting out fires, I'd rather be proactive a little bit in communicating with people.
All right, do we have any questions for Police Chief Russo? Do we have any other discussion items or questions for staff on this agenda item? All right, shall we move to the next agenda item?
Yeah, if you're ready.
I think there's some familiarity with this. I'll do a more detailed background in the business meeting for the benefit of the public in attendance. But just so we can get to discussion, I may streamline that in the work session, if that's okay. This is 3625 East Overhill Drive. This is the second plan unit development the commission's considered for this. The first one was back in December of 2021, as some of you will remember. This property here, just over 6 acres, 6.17. It's zoned in R18, so low density residential. There is some R28 in the neighborhood just to the southeast, but most of this area is the R18 low density single family zone. The new Ferguson Park is across Wasatch Boulevard there to the east. The new proposal by Ivory Homes, and this has been the result of ongoing discussions between the seller of the property, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the city and Ivory Homes over the course of the last 2.5 years on this, as you're aware. But the latest configuration, which is also the concept that we brought to the commission a month or so ago, is a 13 lot planned unit development, low density subdivision 3 lots access directly onto Dover Hill Drive on the west. 1 lot accesses off of Summer Hill, and then the other one just around the other lots, just around the corner on 7650 South. The proposed city park parcel is located kind of in the middle of the property. This is the configuration that preserves the existing pavilion and provides the most park frontage feasible, given what was offered to the city for park space. This also provides direct access onto Dover Hill Drive for that public park as well. So this is the background, and I'm not going to touch on this so much in here, but I will go through this in the business meeting, because there's been a lot of effort to try to obtain open space by the city on this parcel. The effort was to obtain more than is there now, and as you're likely aware, what we were eventually offered by the seller was approximately 2 acres. It wasn't the 2 acres you see here, but that's part of the ongoing discussions here that it's landed to this configuration. Originally, the commission approved with conditions a PUD with 17 lots back in December 2021. So that was approved. I think that's important to point out. A fault study was subsequently done with numerous fault hazards identified. So that previous layout did not work because the location of those faults is kind of right in the middle of the property. So ongoing discussions continue to occur between all parties to find a reasonable solution, and the revised concept was formally submitted as an application. Just as a refresher, this is not for consideration tonight. This was the original 17 lot development that was approved under this configuration and this planned unit development application. You may remember most of these lots did not meet the minimum lot width of the R18 zone. That's something you can request per the PUD ordinance. You can't request additional density, but you can request modifications in lot widths and setbacks and bulk and massing and things like that. So under this one, Ivory had requested reduced lot widths on most of the lots, and then reduced side setbacks on, I believe, all of the lots, if not most of them, which was 5-foot side setbacks. And there was some concern over that. So the commission's final recommendation was to approve this, but subject to normal R18 setbacks. Again, subsequently, fault hazards were found kind of through that central area of the site. So the revised proposal was submitted, and you'll see there that the public park parcel lines up, almost exactly with where the fault constraints are. This is a preliminary concept of the city's park design. And I do want to point out here that the way this would work and the way this is proceeding is between the city, Ivory, and the church. There's an intention here to find the most beneficial park design for the community that we can, while still, giving Ivory, who is under contract and is a buyer on part of this lot, a product that they can work with. But part of this is the city's purchase price does not change here. It's the same as it always has been. And that actually under this configuration, that Ivory Homes would fully construct at their cost, the public park. And that's still being discussed and worked out, but that's the intention here. So the park construction costs are not a city obligation, but by the end of the subdivision, the park would be in and open and ready to use by the public, and then owned by the city, obviously. This park layout provides some parking on Dover Hill Drive, just a little bit, but this has always been envisioned as a passive park. It does slope, and I'll show a slope diagram, a good amount from west to east across the site. So there's a circulator path around a kind of a middle activity area with some slope that gradually increases to the east. And then this lower section here includes the preserved pavilion, kind of tied right in with some sort of playground area. So it creates a couple different activity centers, and then it's got, water-wise landscaping around the outsides and good buffers, vegetation and plants and things between the existing neighborhood to the north. The final approval of the park design would go through, the Architecture Review Commission, but then it would be approved by the city council as a development agreement kind of arrangement. So the actual layout of the park is not part of the commission's consideration, but I think it's important to show kind of as a result of the ongoing discussions, where that has led to date. And then, like I said, the 13 single-family homes surrounding it. So let's get into the PUD details. The detailed analysis of the different provisions of the PUD is in your staff report. It's not provided in the slides, so I can answer any questions on it, but I didn't provide that here. So with 13 lots over 6.17 acres, that's a density of 2.1 units per acre. That's much, much closer to the half acre zoning density in the city than it is to even the R18 density. I want to clarify, R18 is low density. If I just divided 8,000 square foot lots by 6 acres, that's over 30 lots. Obviously, there's constraints and things like that, but 30 lots on this property would also be considered low density in the city. There's been some some concerns out there of high density development, and this is, again, in my opinion, very far from that. This is more akin to a rural residential density.
And also just like by an objective code standard, R18 density is considered, is coded as low density. So if that density would allow 33 lots and still be considered low, the 13 that are proposed do fall within that category by the way the code defines it.
That park parcel is about 30% of the total acreage of the site. That's more than the minimum required in the PUD ordinance, and the PUD ordinance does not require, under standard PUD, does not require that to be public at all. Obviously, this is a little more complicated than a standard PUD where the city is purchasing part of this, but to have a public park as the open space of this subdivision by the time it's finished is a little unique as well. Like I said, you can request some exceptions in that PUD ordinance. Those requested here are the private roadway standards. You can use private roadways in developments in the city. They're just requesting that the pedestrian circulation, that there's not full sidewalk on both sides of that private roadway. They're working on a design that would have a sidewalk or pedestrian access just on one side of that private roadway on the site. You see here, it just kind of served those 8 or 9 lots there on the east side. So they would have a little bit of sidewalk, but not as much as the code normally requires. That gives them a smaller cross section, allows them to fit these lots in here. And then on a few of the lots, I'll show a more clear representation of this. They are requesting some reduced side setbacks in a way that we feel does not impact the existing residential areas in the way that the previous PUD did, the 17 lot configuration. And then some reduced lot width on 2 or 3 of those lots as well. So I'll show that now. The lots highlighted in blue are the only ones requesting any sort of modification from the typical R18 standards. Everything else on those lots and everywhere else in the subdivision is fully subject to normal city code standards and review procedures and anything else. On lot 109, which is that top right lot adjacent to Wasatch Boulevard, the request is for a setback reduction on the east side. So that's the side right adjacent to Wasatch, down to 5 feet. All of the other setbacks comply. On 110, 111, and 112, which back onto Wasatch Boulevard, 110 is requesting 1 modified side yard setback, the south one, not the north. 111 is requesting 2 modified side setbacks. And then 112 is kind of a weird shaped lot. So it is requesting a modified side setback on the north. The extent of lot 112 actually comes all the way down in this triangle. So based on the lot, it may be a little bit of a side setback reduction on that south side as well. This to the south is a vacant parcel right now. There's no structure on that, and it's not a platted lot. So the extent of and I do want to say these 3 lots, actually these 4 lots, are slightly narrower than the city code typically allows. And I'll show, it's by 5 feet or less on each of those.
On 112,
Mhm.
I mean, that's what's, I guess, planned south side. It kind of looks to me like a backyard, like, rather than a side yard.
Yeah,
I mean,
the way our ordinance reads is this would be the front.
Okay.
This is the rear, and then everything else is side.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. The side yard definition is anything that is not a front yard and is not the rear yard, and the rear yard is defined as the point parallel to the front yard.
Okay.
It's like a lot of
Interesting.
weird back and
Uh-huh.
forth, but I do think that
Okay.
actually is accurate.
The letter of the law.
Yeah, it can be tricky to figure out what that looks like,
Mhm.
but
What's the status of those two adjacent properties that are south of 112?
There's just one. Like I said, it's not a part of a subdivision plat. There's no building entitlement on it. So it would have to go through kind of a standalone, it's kind of a misnomer, but
Who owns it?
just a private resident.
with those,
Just that little piece?
It's
That little
it's like a 8,000 square foot lot or 10,000 square foot lot.
smaller triangle directly next to 112, I think it was just planned stormwater.
It's actually part of.
Yeah, this is part of 112. I just didn't highlight it in blue.
And then the larger like trapezoid is that privately owned.
And it's vacant, right?
Yep.
Yeah. With those one lot parcels that aren't part of a subdivision plat and don't have like a building entitlement, people will either bring them in as like a one lot subdivision where they're not actually subdividing the land, but they're bringing it in for review for buildability. To kind of do entitlements on it. Or sometimes people will just submit a building permit for the lot. It depends on the history of it.
How big is that lot?
To the south, well, I can look it up.
Pull it up
It's
for you.
I'm just curious, if-
9,000.
I mean, I just,
Anything like that.
I get concerned when we don't think about how things affect neighborhoods. Is transportation, walkability, bikeability, you know, are we making an orphan somewhere else by how we,
Sure.
I'd love the answer for what,
Let me
what
pull up
happens
the
that-
size on it, Commissioner Mills. We do have code specification that addresses like no remnant parcels within the boundaries of the subdivision, so that we're not getting like. If that were within the subdivision's boundary and kind of like a weird shape that doesn't meet the standard for a lot, and they were like, oh, we're not actually proposing to build on it, it's there, there's passages that prohibits remnant parcels within a subdivision boundary, where it's outside of that. I don't know that would apply, but let me look up the size for you.
the reason I bring it up is of all the variants, this is the one variant that it is adjacent to another property owner. The other one just imposed on stuff within the development. This is somebody external.
So that one is 0.36 of an acre, which in square feet translates to about 15,000 square feet.
Would they need to be noticed?
Yeah,
They received public
got one.
notice, yeah.
Have we had contact with them?
I haven't had direct contact, but we've sent public noticing to them for both applications.
Okay, cool.
Haven't heard anything from them.
Thank you.
again, it's not one they can come in with a building permit tomorrow. They have to entitle it, prove that it's buildable. I do believe there's some utilities or something like that on that property. Again, we haven't looked at it, but I do think it's kind of a unique lot.
I would love for us to be proactive on situations like that in the city when it's not necessarily a buildable piece, you know, and somebody's just sitting on it without the ability to do much with it. You know, what could be done about that? You know, if we could somehow, if there's ability to make that 112 a better piece for the developer, I don't know. I'd love to see us be more creative, and the fact that we're going to impose on somebody else, these dominoes, 10 years, 20 years from now, people looking at, you know, okay, what was their reason for making an exception there? And again, I just would love to see if we could turn part of that into, maybe it could be portion of it could be sold, and maybe remedy 112 in terms of the need for setbacks.
Ivory and the city have talked to that property owner in the past during the
Mhm.
acquisition process.
And they were not interested in talking,
Correct.
despite the fact that it's not a buildable lot. Wow.
So from an impact analysis standpoint, we do believe that the impact of the reductions or modifications is by and large very self-contained, and the impact, especially to the adjacent platted subdivision lots to the north, is no different than a standard R18 development could be. The lots on Dover Hill are standard R18 lots. And even most of these parcels in the blue are still standard, just with a few modifications requested. Here's a table. I'm not going to go through all this, but I do want to point out the lot widths here. The minimum width is 65 feet. That's 110 and 111 there. These two internal lots. The minimum in the R18 zone is 70, so it's pretty close. It is less than the minimum. Everything else is quite a bit over, you can see there. The setback reductions are summarized there. And then the lot sizes, I think, is interesting to point out. 8,000 is the minimum. There's none less than 9,000 in lot size. So part of the PUD analysis is, does this fit the context of the area? And based on this and based on the limitation of where those variations are proposed, it fits very well. This concept originally at a concept level came to city staff with all of these lots requesting variations, and we pushed back against that, and they went and corrected them to be standard, fully compliant lots. Here is a grading profile, and this shows, so the top section AA there is looking west to east across the site. The existing home labeled there would be that existing subdivision to the north. The proposed private lane there obviously is the hammerhead of that roadway. So this would be a general grading profile of how this subdivision will be graded, especially across the back, how this interfaces with the existing neighborhood. There's an existing slope there. That's kind of that slope down to the retention area of that park right now. Ivory is proposing to retain that with a 2-tiered retaining wall. That would have to go through full engineering and sensitive lands review to make sure it's done and engineered and designed properly and complies. But that's what they're proposing. There's not a substantial amount of fill proposed, so that, you know, even a 2-story home on those lots would not really rise above a 1-story home adjacent to the north. And they're not requesting any modification in building height or massing or the ability to do anything in sensitive lands that you can't do elsewhere. So this is all fully subject to the ordinance. And then profile B there is looking south to north across the site. This is a good park profile. So Dover Hill Drive on the left there, that would be the new homes on Dover Hill. You can see the property slopes down quite a bit all the way down to the east, so that the homes on the private lanes across the back and by Wasatch sit quite a bit lower, almost completely below the homes on Dover Hill Drive, and that's all within that 6 acres. So the park itself has a flat area. It drops down. There's some retaining areas for water drainage, not retaining walls. Drops down again to the playground and pavilion area, and then the roadway and the stormwater basin is even lower than that accesses those back private lots. So it gives you a sense of the general grading. Final grading plans are always done after preliminary before final approval. So we have concept grading, and we've got grading profiles. And then this is all reviewed by the city engineer and the city geologist between preliminary and final plat. So again, the impact, homes are entitled to be built. Existing homes and new homes are entitled to be built to 35 feet. If there's sensitive land, sometimes that's 30 feet. Again, that will all be reviewed as this moves forward. But even a full height home would sit quite a ways below the existing neighborhood to the north there, at least where these lots are adjacent to them. So the city's recommendation, and I do want to reiterate, the extensive back and forth and work that's been done on this and by the city and by the church and their patience and willingness to work to find a good solution here. We think this has come up with a very reasonable solution. The fact of the matter is Ivory has 4 acres of this under contract, and that's not going to change. We tried for more open space. It didn't happen. They're entitled to an R18 density development there, whether it's through the PUD process or standard subdivision. They are entitled to build here. 13 lots is very low density. It is closer to a very low density designation than even low density. And having a functional city park that's designed and constructed for the city and done by the time the subdivision's done, it is a real benefit of this and is something that makes this kind of a unique project. There has been good response to some of the concerns that have been heard in the past, the reduced setbacks that are adjacent to the existing built homes have been greatly reduced or completely eliminated, as we talked about. So we're recommending approval of this. And again, the park design will be finalized by the city council. There's still work that needs to be done with the seller. This is just the platting entitlement, the preliminary platting entitlement. Between preliminary plat and final, these are the conditions that would need to be satisfied. This is very typical of any subdivision that comes through the city. They have to go through any sensitive lands procedures that they haven't yet. They do need to dig another trench on the site. They need to dig one right where the church building is. They don't own the property yet, so they can't demolish that. So that would be a requirement there. Any other typical code review comments need to be addressed. A traffic impact memo needs to be done, and they are aware of that. That being said, if you divide out the trips per day here on a normal public street, this level of density and the different times people are leaving probably isn't going to cause much of a tangible impact to traffic. That being said, we're going to require that. Utility approval and will serve letters, standard. The Architecture Review Commission has to review any PUD per ordinance. So this is going to go there in the January ARC meeting. And then we're asking for plans for trash collection and snow removal and parking maintenance and things like that on the private road. Public street, we've got city code that deals with that and the city enforces, but private road, they will need to provide a plan for that. They need to submit a fencing plan per the PUD ordinance. And then again, as it was before, and as we're seeing tonight, any significant modifications to the plat as a result of any of these conditions or any other city process would have to come back to the planning commission. So that's what I have for you on this one. We've got 7 minutes, but we can continue questions in the business meeting as well.
I have to say, I really, and I've said this before, I really appreciate the changes and the efforts made. I still have concerns with the setbacks. And the fact that we talk about that we have setbacks in the code for a reason. And if we allow it here, how can we enforce it other way if someone wanted to build something and have, I'm concerned from a precedent perspective and from a safety perspective, having the not to code setbacks.
5 feet is allowed by building code. You have to fire rate, you have to limit openings,
Okay.
windows and things like that. Canyon Center, those homes have 3 foot setbacks and that was allowed. Giverny was a PUD, they have reduced setbacks. Newberry Grove, and we've got other PUDs in the city.
Okay.
The answer to avoiding any sort of unintended precedents is they have to come through the PUD process that comes through the planning commission.
PUDs are actually also only possible on 3 to 5 acres, so 3 for a minor PUD and 5 for a standard. So sometimes we have people who come in with 2 acres and are like, oh man, I really want to make this many lots work. Can I do a PUD? And we're like, you can't, it has to just be a standard subdivision.
So through the PUD, and it's a little weird to think about, it's not approving a violation, it's allowed within the authority of that code chapter. It is much different than building a structure, letting it for no reason at all, letting it sit for 5 years and then coming and asking for forgiveness.
Right. That's topical or anything.
The setbacks between 110 and 111, 5 on
Each side.
each
10
side,
feet total.
so you get total 10, normally would be total 12, right?
The minimum that it could be would be 16. 8 and 8 would be the minimum setbacks in typical R18.
Okay. And between 111, 112, same thing,
Same thing
so you go from 16 to 10.
on the 2 lots, and that was what was requested on all 17 before.
And on 112, the bottom setback,
Yeah, only if they build a house, kind of a weird shape along this diagonal line. These are just the maximum footprint. This isn't where the houses are necessarily going to be. This is just where they could be. They're going to have articulated massing. But yes, yeah.
Not
As
saying
proposed.
that this is gonna be built with the 5 foot set. I mean, that's.
I mean, I just don't,
Request
yeah, I
is,
don't think
you
lot
know.
112 is going to be, a trapezoid house.
build a
Yeah.
house in that shape.
Next to a park too. I mean,
Yeah.
it-
I agree with your point, though, that all of the other setback reductions will affect neighbors that will buy homes based on an understanding. That one and what at 112 is a little different situation. And I think it's important that setbacks are not only about safety. They're about how close your neighbor is to you.
Sure.
And so the setback at 112 in that bottom section,
Bottom side.
yeah,
I don't
whatever.
know what we're called, bottom
The
side.
side yard
Left
bottom
side,
uh,
south side.
Is-
I got it right.
was my concern as well.
So the front of that lot, just south of 112.
The
Was
one on
the-
Abigail.
The southwest line, that dotted line there.
So it actually comes around on a curve. It's kind of cut off on that image, but it fronts on kind of a,
So would that technically be their side yard?
Yeah.
Or would that be their backyard?
the side that butts
The
up
adjacent
against.
lots,
The
that's
adjacent
the
lot.
That would
side.
be the side.
Okay,
Wasatch
so
is the
their requirement would be 8 feet
Eight.
on
Yeah.
that. Okay, so you're.
And they have no
looking at
path to get any
13
modification to
feet.
that.
Correct.
13 feet potentially. from that
13
house.
instead of 16.
Unless they did a variance.
So we're talking about a 3-foot difference.
Yeah.
In the closest, if they both built as close as they could, as much as they could, yeah.
I think we'll have to continue our discussion in the next meeting. So that we can start that on time. Does anyone have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Motion to adjourn.
Okay. A motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.